Today we've got a crazy revenge story against a cheating boyfriend. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, I told the cops about my husband's secret business. Many years ago, my husband suddenly became a rich fellow. It may be difficult to believe that seeing him now, there was a point in his life where he had so much money that he didn't even know what to do with it. Oh, I'm kidding, he knew just what to do with it and he darn well did it. That year, I just found out I was pregnant. My husband was worried as heck. We did not plan to get pregnant at all. We were struggling to get out of debt. We had a huge wedding and it cost us a lot of money. 2 months later, my husband said he was going to quit his job and start a pizza shop with what was left of our savings. I was livid. I thought he was going bonkers. I even spoke to our parents about it when I saw that he wasn't listening to me. I called his mom and stepdad. I called my mom and dad. Someone had to talk some sense into him. Interestingly, both sides agreed that he had a good point about wanting to start a business, and they agreed that his reasons were valid. He just wants to be able to provide for your family, my mom said to me. His stepdad went on to tell a story of how he had to step up and start something big after he proposed to my mother-in-law, who was a single mother at the time. He said he knew his job could not hold down a family, so he abandoned the job and thought of a new way to make money. My dad, who had never really liked my husband, offered to give him some money for his business. I was surprised at their supportiveness. I started to think that if my husband could convince my dad, then he was probably up to something good, so I let it go. I told my husband that he had my support and that it was okay to go on and start the business. At this time, I was 4 months gone. In the 5th month, my husband opened up his pizza shop and employed a young dude from the neighborhood he grew up in. The boy was about 19 at the time. I was going to question his choice of employee, especially since this was going to be his first and only employee at the shop. But I decided to take my dad's advice and not bother my husband. My dad said that the best thing to do at the time was to let my husband be and not interfere unnecessarily with his work and business. So I let him be. In the 7th month of my pregnancy, I was shocked at the amount of money that was coming in. My husband's business was doing very well and I was proud of him. During the 8th and 9th month of my pregnancy, I was hardly ever outside. My doctor recommended that I be placed on bed rest until the delivery of my baby was taken. All through my pregnancy, I hated pizza. I'm normally a pizza-loving person. I love to eat tasty pizza and would order from different places just to compare the tastes. That was how much I love pizza. But while I was pregnant, I could not stand even the smell of pizza. It was so bad that my husband would have to take off his clothes at the front door whenever he came back home from the shop. Anyway, after I had my baby, I was strong enough to stop by and visit my husband at the pizza shop. But I was reluctant to do it. My hands were full with the baby, and I spent every free time I had resting. One day, I asked my husband to bring me some of his tasty pizza when coming home. I've always known that my husband was a fantastic cook, but I was curious to know what his pizza tasted like. He'd never made it for me at home before starting his business. When my husband returned that evening with a large pizza box, I was super excited to see it, but was disappointed with the taste. I just didn't see how my husband might have been that successful as a pizza business owner selling that kind of pizza. It wasn't that it was tasteless, but it was just average. It wasn't tasteless, but it sure wasn't tasty either. I tried to justify the amount of money coming in by telling myself that my husband made sales because of the location of the shop, but that couldn't have been the case. The pizza shop was located in a residential area. Not many people even like to eat out in our part of the town. One Friday evening, when my mother-in-law was in town visiting, I left my baby with her and left to visit my husband in his shop. I was surprised to see that my husband's shop was nearly empty. Save for 2 pairs of teenage couples eating together, there wasn't much going on. Since it was a Friday evening, I expected that to be when the shop would be the busiest. I met the young staff my husband employed and asked him where my husband was. He replied that my husband was at the shop behind. When I asked him what that meant, he was taken aback and then he tried to say something else. I told him I knew just what I heard. When he refused to take me to the back shop, I waited for my husband. A few minutes later, I saw him walk out of the back shop into the pizza shop. He was shocked when he saw me, and then with his eyes, he pleaded that we went out to talk. We both went into my car, and before I could ask my husband what the shop at the back was for, he told me all about it. The big news was that my husband was operating a secret casino in a secret room just behind the pizza shop, and that was where all the money had been coming from. At first, I was worried about him getting caught. but he assured me that no one would ever suspect a thing. The area was a quiet one and the police hardly ever came to that area because of how quiet and generally safe it was. Of course, I agreed to keep it a secret. We had lots of money coming in and we had just had a baby. Fast forward to 5 months later, my husband told me that he'd employed a new staff. When he told me the staff's name, I assumed it was some other young dude. The name sounded like a guy's name. One day, I took my baby to the park, and on my way back, I stopped at my husband's shop. I asked his young employee if he was around, and he said no, my husband had gone out to buy supplies. I decided to go into the casino and see what was going on there. Just at the entrance, I saw the hottest girl ever. When she turned, she was even more attractive than I'd envisaged. She smiled and said, "Hello," and I sheepishly introduced myself to her. She said she'd seen pictures of me and smiled some more. That upset me because why was she smiling? And why was someone that attractive working with my husband? Also, I thought that she was a dude. That night, I told my husband I stopped by his shop, and he nodded and said she told him. I then said I didn't know she was a she, given her masculine name. He nodded again as though he wasn't paying attention. But I knew my husband well enough to know that he only ever did that when he was hiding something. I sensed at that point that my husband was either having an affair with that woman or was trying to. I waited for a while, but he still didn't talk about it, so I let it go. My husband's gambling business was doing okay at this time. He was making a lot of money, but he started to stay very late at the casino. I already knew about the business, so he would just say he was busy at the casino. Sometimes he would say, I had to supervise the men at you-know-where, and I'd have to let it go since I already knew about it. I wasn't stupid though. I knew his staying late at work had something to do with a new employee with a masculine name, but I had no proof, and I could not risk asking him about it. Luckily, my mom told me about a local private investigator in town. I talked to him, and he promised to get me picture evidence if I desired. Sure enough, he showed me pictures of my husband and his girlfriend sneaking into a local hotel after work hours. My husband didn't leave until some minutes past 11 p.m. It was clear what was going on. I paid the private investigator and decided on what to do. The only reason my husband had a girlfriend was because he could afford to give her some money. And the only reason he could afford to give her money was because he was running an illegal gambling business. I told my mom that I was going to rat him out to the police, and she thought it was a good idea too. My husband may have been smart enough to know just how to operate a secret gambling business, but he was terrified of getting into trouble. I don't know that there's anything he fears more than going to prison. My mom promised to talk to a lawyer she knows about the legal consequences of running a gambling business without the proper license and get back to me. The lawyer assured Mom that since my husband was a first-time offender, he couldn't possibly get a jail term. A fine, maybe. When that was out of the way, I made a call to our local police station, and they went to my husband's office and burst in. He was charged immediately, and the judge, as we had guessed, gave him the option of a fine. It was a huge amount, but my husband had made enough from the business anyway. He paid the fine, and that was it. For the next year, my husband was depressed. He was sad about losing that amount of money and losing his girlfriend too. Interestingly, he told me that he suspected that she reported him. I asked him why she would do something like that, considering that she was his employee, but he said nothing. He couldn't tell me about whatever issues they had in their relationship, of course. He just told me that he suspected her. 2 years later, we got on with our lives. My husband's pizza became better, and we made decent money from his pizza shop. The whole thing taught my husband a valuable lesson. The most important was to never cheat on his wife. He saw how his girlfriend ran away and suspected that she ratted him out to the police, so for years, he believed it was unwise to trust any woman who was not his wife. My husband and I are still married to this day. I guess I'm kind of shocked that OP is okay with just getting revenge, just to bring things back to the status quo and then keep on going. Either way, I feel like this backdoors gambling thing was going to be a ticking time bomb regardless. I mean, somebody is going to have such a bad luck streak in there and is just going to come out volatile and report the guy, right? If anything, if I were in OP's shoes, I would just be worried that this is just going to push them to be way more secretive and trying to cover up things even better and get right back into it considering how well it worked for them. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, when your rival tries to destroy your high school record, you fight back. 12th grade is a tough place to be when you're always the star student. It's harder when your rival's constantly plotting your downfall with the help of an older person. Letting people figure out what was going on with their lives without actively interfering wasn't something my rival and her mother didn't understand. And that almost cost me the icing on the cake for my high school career, being valedictorian. Getting the best scores on every test, assignment, and exam wasn't an easy feat, and a competitive school like mine meant that there was no moment of rest. You always had to do better, or you could quickly be taken over. Lily was always one step behind, and that infuriated her. Eventually, it infuriated her mother too, and they tried to destroy my chances at a successful finish. Getting back at them was inevitable because they ruined healthy competition. Being valedictorian was a good end to being a high school student, especially since recruiters and staff of prestigious universities attended the graduation ceremony every year to examine the best graduating students. Most of the attention was on the valedictorian because, in a school like mine, it meant that you were not just a good student, you were the textbook model of what a good student should be. In my year, that was me. I only got A's in all my classes. I was a member of the debate club, the swimming team, robotics, and the chess club. I was on every committee and volunteered for everything I could. I helped with the local soup kitchen and volunteered for food drives. Whenever it was prom, I helped as much as I could. It wasn't just me, but no one else did as much as I did. One came close though, and that was Lily. Lily had been my strongest competition for as long as I can remember. And they were always particularly healthy. I always got on the receiving end of whatever Lily was plotting. Don't get me wrong, she didn't always move to dirty tricks all the time. Lily is really smart and very well known among students and teachers. The only difference between us was that they liked me. Why? I wasn't condescending, rude, or mean, and I didn't have anyone in the school to help with anything I was navigating in school. Lily's mother, Miss Miller, was the dean of students, which means she had access to most information about the school. In middle school, we were both in the drama club and we were auditioning for a version of Snow White. We went in separately so no one knew who was auditioning for what. When the casting list came out, I found out that Lily and I had both auditioned for Snow White. I didn't know that Lily had auditioned because she heard me saying I wanted to, but then my best friend told me that this was what happened. I didn't think too much about it because Lily has always competed with me. It wasn't that she went after the same things I did because I wanted them. Rather, it was because they were the best things to go for. However, there was no denying the fact that I was better and everyone else knew it. I got the role of Snow White, and Lily got cast as the understudy. Lily immediately went into a fit and went storming to her mother about how I'd gotten the lead role by charming the drama teacher. I got called in by Miss Miller, and she launched into the most vindictive lecture about how I shouldn't be bribing teachers or bringing others down to get what I wanted. I was shocked because if anyone did that, it was her daughter. I didn't say anything because there was no one in management to defend me like Lily. Lily didn't get the part regardless because the drama teacher refused to give the part to Lily. She didn't stop antagonizing me, but that didn't stop me from doing my best at everything. The competition was intense in everything by the time we got to the 12th grade. Lily's mother was also the assistant principal by then. In scores, she was always a point or two behind me, and this made it clear that I was going to be valedictorian. I knew Lily wanted it too. I mean, who doesn't want to be valedictorian? Eventually, the announcement was made and, as expected, I was valedictorian. I was really happy about this and it showed, until everything almost got destroyed. Let me tell you, going up against an adult or someone who has more powers than you can only be combated by someone with more powers. That was what saved me. We had a written test a few days before I was summoned to the principal's office. When I got there, Lily and Miss Miller were there seated as I walked in. At first, I assumed it was going to be another one of those competitions we had to go for together, being that we were the top students of the class. However, I hadn't gotten wind of any competition whatsoever. The principal, Mr. Reagan, was very kind to me, and I always guessed it had something to do with my grades and performance in school. Usually, he would have told me that there was a competition coming up and he would like for me to be part of it. When I entered the room, I sensed that the atmosphere was nothing calm or even competitive. Mr. Reagan spoke first. "Sasha, Lily told me something very disturbing about you today, and if it is true, I am very disappointed in you." I was confused because the worst thing I had done in school for a long time was pass notes in class. "What do you mean, sir?" I asked. "Lily said you cheated on your last history test." I thought the wind had been knocked out of me. I had never cheated on any test in my life. "I saw you, Sasha. You were writing out of a cheat sheet during the test," Lily said with a smirk on her face. I immediately denied it and let Mr. Reagan know that I could have never done that. Miss Miller didn't let me finish before she said she suspected how I used to get almost perfect scores every time. The scorn in her voice was unmistakable. I refused to take the blame for what I didn't do, so I told him to talk to the history teacher. The history teacher came and said there was no way I could have cheated on the test. Mr. Reagan asked why Lily lied, but Miss Miller got defensive and said her daughter could not have lied. Mr. Reagan told them to leave, but made me stay behind. I was shocked that I was even the subject of a cheating scandal. I told Mr. Reagan that I didn't do anything of the sort. He told me he believed me, but that I had to be careful of getting on Miss Miller's bad side, because graduation was coming in less than a month. I thought it was over after the history teacher cleared me, but the next thing I knew, rumors started spreading around that I'd been cheating throughout my entire school years. The rumors spread so widely that I was no longer called to be a part of committees. I was so worried that my grades dropped from what they used to be. Until I made the chilling discovery that Lily and her mother had been spreading these lies about me. I was walking to the staff room during lunch break when I overheard Lily and her mother talking. They were talking about how I would soon be removed from being valedictorian since their plan was working. I quickly took out my phone and recorded the conversation. It was there that I found out that Miss Miller was going to manipulate my student records to say that I'd been lying with the help of a hacker. I ran as fast as the tears in my eyes could allow to Mr. Reagan's office. I immediately played him the recording and was ugly crying when I told him I didn't understand why anyone would want to do that to me. I was crying so much that Mr. Reagan had to call in his secretary to bring me a box of tissues in a bin. By the time I was done crying, the tissue box was halfway empty, and I'd also decided that Lily was going to pay for what she did. I told Mr. Reagan that I was not going to step down as valedictorian no matter what the rumors said about me. He agreed with me and said that since I did nothing wrong, I had nothing to be worried about. He also promised to take care of Miss Miller's corrupt misconduct, but that he wasn't going to do it without enough evidence. I asked if the recording wasn't enough, and he said he wasn't sure that Lily and her mother were the ones speaking in the recording. It was there that I decided to take matters into my own hands, but it was going to take time. For the next few weeks, there were constant demands that I should step down as valedictorian from the students and the teachers. I refused and told everyone who cared to listen that I didn't do anything they were accusing me of. As expected, no one believed except those who were my friends and a few of the teachers. And Lily? She made classes heck for me. She would make snide comments whenever I tried to answer a question in class or even give a presentation. I went from being respected to becoming the subject of mockery. It was so much that even the teachers did nothing to stop it. At some point, I almost wanted to give up and let Lily and her mother get away with what they did. However, I was reminded that I could lose out on getting into a prestigious university if these rumors were not quelled. I wasn't going to have my life ruined by people who didn't understand healthy competition. Graduation day quickly arrived, and when it was finally time for the valedictorian speech, Mr. Reagan called me up. Miss Miller looked disgusted, and for a minute, I wanted to just lash out at her. But my plan wasn't going to go to waste. I started speaking to my fellow graduating students about integrity and how dirty tricks were never the way to go. Miss Miller stood and told me it was ironic that I was accused of cheating and still had the guts to talk about integrity. Then and there, I turned to the rest of the school and told them this was a case of the pot calling the kettle black. Then I played the recording I'd opened on my phone into the microphone for the school to hear. While the color was being drained from Miss Miller's face, I explained to the school that she had been sabotaging me and spreading lies about me with her daughter. The icing on the cake of that day was the teacher saying they had heard from Miss Miller that I'd been cheating and that my parents had hired someone to manipulate my school records. I wished my classmates success in life and walked away from the stage. Mr. Reagan calmed everyone in attendance down and promised to take care of anything that was going on. I had a good graduation party with my friends, and I was approached by many recruiters from the most prestigious universities. Later, my parents told me that they were suing Miss Miller for defamation of character. Mr. Reagan also informed my parents that Miss Miller was fired after the school council's board decided that she was not good for their image. The last time I saw Lily was 2 years ago, working in a coffee shop. I doubt that she recognized, but I decided not to make conversation. If I didn't fight, this story would not have ended with me living my best life. Honestly, it's wild to see any parent get that involved in high school drama of their kids. You know you're going too far when your actions could easily be adapted into like a Disney Channel movie. Our next story is, boyfriend cheats on me with his male best friend, so I reveal his secret to his parents. I, 29-year-old female, used to think that I was a good judge of character. I mean, I studied human psychology in school and I was pretty good at reading people. I could tell a person's intention after meeting them for just 10 minutes. I could even guess things like their family background if they were an only child, and if they weren't, their number in the sibling hierarchy. I could guess all that, and most of the time I usually end up correct. Some people back in college used to think that I was psychic, but I used to tell them that it was a God-given talent. Apparently, I was wrong. I had no talent at all. Everything I'd done before had been good guesses with a mixture of luck. It's purely random, because if it wasn't, how in the world would I explain why I didn't know that my boyfriend was gay? I mean, we dated for a year before I found out. The entire experience is something I'll never forget, and it's definitely something I'll tell my kids and even my grandkids. I met Jerome, 33-year-old male, 5 years ago when I was working as a teenage counselor in a private school. Can't disclose which. He was the older brother of a girl I'd been working with. Let's call her Leah, 16-year-old female. Leah had been struggling with all types of mental health problems. Anorexia, body dysmorphia, bouts of depression, and so on. I'd been seeing her 3 times a week at the time before I met Jerome, and she had started to get better. But I wanted to talk to her parents about taking her mental health seriously because of some of the complaints she made about them, which I can't disclose either. The parents were supposed to come over for a meeting with me, but like they've always said, they were busy. And so Jerome stepped in, being the big brother. I still remember how I felt watching him walk into my office and take a seat in front of me. He was so smooth and graceful. It was almost as though he had practiced the fine art of walking into a cramped office and taking a seat on a tiny couch. Don't even get me started on the voice. He was simply perfect, and like every other person, I fell for what I saw. But he was the brother of a student in my care and discipline, and practice had taught me not to pursue anything with anyone that might conflict with my work. We had a long discussion about Leah, and I gave him my recommendations, and the meeting was over. I could tell that he wanted to say something at the end, but for some reason he stopped himself and left. I didn't see him again for a few months, till it was time for PTA. Instead of Leah's parents, he stepped in again, which was a nice improvement from the previous year where no one showed up for her. At the end of the meeting, I decided to talk to him to understand why Leah's parents were so absent in her life. He laughed at my question and told me that their parents were both business people. Their dad had an oil company, while their mom inherited a real estate company from her father. They joined both companies together and are running it as joint CEOs. Even though the business was already thriving, they were still very much involved in it and barely had time for anything else. Jerome said he had gotten used to it, but Leah was the one that I was worried about. I kept asking questions about their family the whole time in the school. By the time he was ready to leave, he asked for my number and promised to tell me whatever I wanted to know over dinner. I knew I shouldn't have agreed to it, but I'd also been thinking of asking him out, so when he did, I jumped at the offer. That Friday, we went to a fancy restaurant where I learned a lot about him. He was kind of the black sheep of the family, even though the family didn't have a lot of sheep. They only had 2 kids, which was Leah and Jerome. They wanted him to study business, but he was more interested in fashion, and it took a lot of conflict and convincing for him to finally sway to their interests. After college, they expected him to come over to the company to start learning what it meant to lead, but instead he traveled to Paris to learn fashion as he wanted. He had just recently returned when I met him. After the dinner date, he drove me home, and before we parted, he told me how much fun he had. Thinking about the tiny details like this makes me really upset at myself because I didn't see it coming. I know how to tell when people are lying. There are lots of markers and physical gestures they give off, but with Jerome, I didn't notice a single thing. Till today, I still ask myself whether he was telling the truth or I failed to notice that he was lying. Anyway, he said he'd like to see me again, and I agreed to a second date. This time we went to see a movie, and then a third date where we went to a runway show, whose designer was a friend of his. After that date, he asked me to be his girlfriend. The one thing I noticed was that things were moving a bit too fast, but I just chalked it up to the fact that he probably liked me as much as I liked him. By this point, we hadn't even gotten intimate, and he hadn't shown any interest in getting that away with me. All I thought was that he was being a gentleman, and I found it kind of admirable. A week after we became official, he decided to introduce me to his friends, so he threw a party in his apartment. When I arrived, he introduced me to all of them, particularly his best friend Reed, 35-year-old male. Reed seemed like any ordinary guy. He was also into fashion, and he was the one who hosted the runway show, which we went to on our third date. They were very close, even closer than his other two friends. I should have noticed something here, but I was too blinded by the love I had for him to see him any other way. One other thing I should have noticed was the fact that 3 months into our relationship, he still never once asked me to be intimate with him. I didn't like to be too forward because in society, men are usually the ones who initiate such intimacy, but when he didn't make a move, I had to ask. He told me he was trying to make sure we were serious before initiating that. I thought I was right about him being a gentleman, but I didn't know that that was just another lie he was telling me. Next, Jerome took me to his parents' house and introduced me to them. This was 5 or 6 months into the relationship. At the dinner table, his mom said I was the first girl he ever brought to meet them. And of course, that made me feel special. She even said they thought he was gay because they'd only seen him in the company of his friends and his best friend Reed. The way they talked about the possibility of him being gay made me realize that they didn't approve of it. Leah had once told me that her family were devout Christians, but I didn't think that that would mean they were homophobic too. Anyway, 1 year after we started dating, Jerome still hadn't touched me. This was when I started suspecting that something was wrong. I asked him about it again, and he said he was waiting till we got married. That one was a lie, and I could tell. We had an entire argument about it and didn't speak for days until he finally apologized. He told me to give him a little more time. He said he'd been under a lot of stress with his parents and he's just trying to figure that out. I said sure. Over the next few weeks, we started to hang out less and less. There was always something he was working on, something he needed to do that required his immediate attention. Sometimes, the excuse was that he was hanging out with the boys. One day, I took my dog out on a walk, and I ran into one of his friends, George, whom he was supposed to be spending the weekend with. George said he didn't know about any weekend hangouts, and he even called his other friend Damien. That one also confirmed that he didn't know of any hangouts. They tried to call Reed, but his phone was switched off. It all started to make sense to me at that moment. Jerome had another girlfriend, I told myself. That was the reason why I didn't see him a lot, and he blamed the entire thing on work. That was why he still hadn't touched me since we started to date. I decided that I was going to confront him. I had his location because he shared it with me one day, so when I went to the place he was staying, which turned out to be an Airbnb, I had to bribe the receptionist to let me into his place without calling him. If I was going to catch him red-handed, I couldn't let him know I was around. She gave me a spare key and I let myself in. Imagine my shock when I saw that the person Jerome was cheating on me with was his best friend Reed. I had trained myself to be calm and collected, but that day, I couldn't contain my shock. I screamed. Jerome begged me not to tell anyone. He told me that Reed wasn't his best friend like everyone imagined, but his boyfriend. He kept it a secret because his parents were conservative Christians, and they wouldn't want to hear that their son is gay. They would disown him and strip him of his trust fund and inheritance. He said that was why he started going out with me, because he wanted to throw them off his back. He literally told me to my face that he was using me to confuse his parents so they wouldn't think he was gay. I'd never felt more stupid than that day. Aside from being stupid, I felt hurt and betrayed. I had fallen for Jerome and all he had thought of me was a plaything he could use to get his inheritance from his parents. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not after all he did to me, so I told a lie of my own. I told him I'd continue to be his girlfriend, but even if we didn't have sex, we'd have to spend the night together so that people won't get suspicious. Jerome stupidly agreed, and one night, while he slept, I took his phone and looked through his chats with Reed. As expected, they had some sexting and nudes exchanged, so I screenshotted the whole thing and sent it to my phone. The next time we went to dinner with his parents, I waited till he was comfortable before I blurted out, "Your son is gay." The whole table went silent and Jerome begged me not to say anything, but I didn't listen to him. They asked me what I was talking about, and I told them about Reed and how he was his lover and not the friend they thought he was. I gave them all the proof they needed on my phone and stood up to leave their house. I didn't even wait for the fallout, I just grabbed my stuff and left. Leah told me later that he was disowned and they took his name off the inheritance. I thought I was going to feel sorry for him when I heard that, but I didn't. All I thought was that he finally got what he deserved. I mean, I can't blame OP for doing what they did when you were strung along for an entire year of your life, but I do really feel bad for Leah here. Realistically though, I don't understand how Jerome thought he would get away with what he was trying to do. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.